You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, thanks for coming back to the show. You are listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. And since we last met, Hurricane Ian has wrought its devastation across the state of Florida and plenty of points north of Florida as well. For me, well, I was so lucky. I spent Monday putting up shutters on my own home before helping neighbours with their shutters. Then on Tuesday, I quickly recorded last week's show before we lost power, the internet, or both. Well, we lost internet for about 2 minutes in total and kept power pretty much throughout the storm. Thanks to all of you who reached out concerned for my welfare. I was very touched by your concern. But Courtney, who hosts our Hiking Unfiltered podcast, lives in Fort Myers, and she has had a terrible time being evacuated, then coming back to no power or internet. Fortunately, her house wasn't flooded, but it did suffer some damage. Yet, throughout all of this, she still recorded a show, sitting on the steps of her home, talking to her husband, Travis, on how hiking can prepare you for a hurricane. Now that is being dedicated. She still hasn't got power, but she's grateful and only thinking about her less fortunate neighbours. Way to go, Courtney. This week on this show, we have a young guy, Hunter Rud, who's been an outdoorsy type all of his life, but as you'll hear, never really considered a long-distance hike till, well, he did. I really enjoyed his attitude and hope you enjoy meeting him. Hunter will be on shortly. And a couple of weeks ago, I put a notice on Facebook to ask you all what you'd like me to do with the middle section of our show for the rest of the year. Our Mighty Blue class of 2022 has wound down, so there was a gap. There were some great ideas, and I'm going to incorporate some of them on a monthly basis. So this month, October, I'm going to be focusing on hostels on the trail. We're starting with my friend Lady Di from Lady Di's B&B in Damascus. If there's a hostel you'd like me to feature, just write to steve@hikingradionetwork.com and let me know. I should let you know now that I intend to do the same thing as I did this year, next year, with another Mighty Blue class of 2023, of course. So if you plan on hiking next year and you want to be interrupted every couple of weeks by me, then email me again at that address, steve@hikingradionetwork.com. Finally today, I'm reading another section of George Stephanos' Then the Hail Came. This week, George is going through a part of the trail that I loved so much when I went both in 2014 and 2019. He ends up at one of my favourite spots, a chestnut knob shelter, with its amazing view over Burke's Garden. I can still see it now as I write and say this. So let's get going. Here's Hunter Rud. Our guest today is one of this year's successful thru-hikers. This is Hunter Rud. Hey Hunter, how are you?
I'm good, Steve. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on. And so you're one of this year's successful thru-hikers. So first up, congratulations, because I know this isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. So tell us how old you are, because your voice sounds quite a bit older than it actually is, for me anyway.
Yeah, I do get that often. I'm 23. I actually turned 23 in July, so not too much older than 23. But
my God, you're going to sound like an old man by the time you're 30, aren't you?
Well, hopefully I don't look like an old man. We'll see.
No, you certainly don't. I see you've still got the hiking beard. Is that something you've always had, or did you just grow that for the trail?
No, so I keep it. I try to keep it manicured when I'm not on trail, but I'll have to send you a few pictures because it was definitely a lot longer when I was at the end there. But I decided to get rid of it. It got a little too long, and I looked really old with that look. So.
With that voice as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So now hiking is in your family, isn't it? Tell us about your dad.
Yeah, so I mean, my dad's really he's been hiking his whole life. He seems like any trail in the country here, it seems like he's done part of it or the whole thing. And he did the AT in '93, so that was his first big hike. Recently completed.
Cool, that was different. Was different.
Yeah,
what does he tell? Does he tell you stories about that?
He does actually, and before I started the AT, he brought out this old, I mean, I don't know if you're aware of what it is, but it's like a projector screen, and it's like an old fashioned projector with
Of course
slides.
I am. Of
Yeah.
course I am.
So, I've never seen that before, but he pulled it out of my grandma's storage room and showed me a bunch of pictures and told me stories of his hike. And, I did a fair amount of complaining with, pack weight and gear, but I couldn't imagine with, the gear in the 90s, how heavy it was if it got
Yeah.
wet. So it's definitely a different change. The amount of people on trail too was a big thing that is a big change from then to
And
now.
did he say how much his pack weighed?
I don't remember. I think I would assume it's probably 50 to 60 pounds. I've seen pictures. His tent weighed a few pounds in and of itself.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And and back then he did a few canoe camping trips and stuff, but nothing like that. And that's how he got started. So
Did he always hike by himself, or did he ever take you and any of your siblings? I know you've got a twin brother, haven't you?
yeah, and then a sister as well. And so he did take all of us hiking. But again, it was never anything that I was too interested in doing. I think out of all my out of all my siblings, I was the one he at least expected to want to go out and hike. But and I'm from the Black Hills of South Dakota, so it seems like any road you go down, there's a hiking trail or a trailhead somewhere that you can take. So he'd strap all of us up on a backpack, and he'd walk up in the woods and just take us around. So
Nice.
it was definitely fun, and I don't remember all of it, but I think as I've gotten older and now that I'm hiking myself, it's something I appreciate. So
Is he still hiking now?
he is. He's going to do the Bent Mackay Trail here in a few weeks, actually. So
Right.
he's looking forward to that, and then he's going to be doing the CDT soon as well. He wanted to do in sections. He's mid-60s now, so
It's okay. I feel his pain. I know.
Yeah,
I know how it feels. Yeah.
so he through hiked the PCT and the AT, and I'm really trying to get him to through hike the CDT. I think he's coming around, and he might give that a go. So we'll see.
Yeah. Nice. And obviously you weren't alive when he first went, being only 23 now. And you've already mentioned that hiking wasn't your preferred outdoor adventure. Tell us about the canoe trips.
Yeah, so I multiple times a year I've grown up going up to kind of the Boundary Waters Quetico area, which is northern Minnesota, southern Ontario, and usually those consist of getting dropped off in the woods for 2 weeks at a time, if not more, and doing a lot of portaging. So that's kind of like my backpacking
Sure.
background, I guess, is just portaging from one lake to another. But I've grown up, going up there fishing. It was a lot of fishing and canoeing, really. So I'm pretty well rounded when it comes to camping. I think hiking and backpacking came kind of when I was doing the AT. And I do a lot of camping on my own as well, especially when my dad was out doing the PCT. I like to travel around and live in my car for the summer if I can. So,
Oh my gosh.
I get,
What is wrong with you, man?
I guess I like to run around and do different things, but it's fun.
So did you, when you were growing up, did your father try to interest you in long distance hiking, or did he not force any of this onto you? Just said, you'll find your way and you'll come to it your own way.
It was never anything that was forced onto me. Both my parents have always been incredible with allowing us to kind of do what we want to do. And I think it was more so something he didn't think I would enjoy. So he never really forced it on me. And we never really went out and did any day hikes or anything like that. It was really just, I kind of grew up seeing him go out on month-long hikes, week-long hikes, whatever it is. And I kind of got adapted to that lifestyle. And I think as I got a little older, really it only changed, the last year and a half. So it hasn't been too long.
Yeah. Tell us about that, because, you've grown up being doing your canoe trips, and a lot of those were solitary, I presume, were they? Or would you go with others?
No. So a lot of them I'd go with him.
Right.
So a lot of the canoe trips were with other people, my brother and my dad. And then, but a lot of my like car camping adventures like that, pretty much all of that was just me. So I kind of got a good mix of being alone and then being with other people. And that's kind of how I learned everything.
So what happened to you for you to actually do the AT? What was the switch?
Yeah. So it was, it's crazy because I vividly remember the day. But so my dad was training for the PCT. He's wanted to through hike the PCT for a long time. He retired. So it was April of 2021. So kind of middle towards the near end of COVID. And my
Sure.
brother and I flew out to San Diego with him to kind of lead him off on his hike. And I remember we drove down to the Mexico California border and said goodbye to him. It was the first time that I really remember kind of not going to be able to see him or even speak to him really for a few months. So, I remember as he stepped off, we kind of drove away, and my brother and I were going back to San Diego. And I was looking out the window, seeing the desert, because obviously the first 700 miles of
Sure.
the PCT is desert. And
Yeah, that's never attracted me, by the
yeah,
way. The
yeah.
700 miles of
For
desert.
some reason, I guess it did to me. And I
Yeah.
tapped my brother, and I'm like, hey, I'm gonna do this one day. And we got back to the hotel, and I started looking up AT videos. I knew the AT was, I feel like, when people think of hiking and long distance hiking, they might not know a lot, but the AT for me is what first came to mind.
So you saw the PCT and you didn't think, oh, I'm going to hike that one day. You thought, I'm going to go to the complete other side of the country and I'm going to hike the AT. What was going on inside your head that made you want to just suddenly think, well, this is something I want to do?
I've always been someone who loves doing things that I'm not comfortable with, if that makes sense. I love being in uncomfortable situations. For example, and when I was in college, I've always been kind of an athletic guy. But whenever a coach said, we have to run or do sprints or something, I hated it. So in order to kind of get over that, I made myself train and run a marathon. And doing marathons and in training for that, I kind of fell in love with running. And I kind of took that same approach with this. It's something that I'm not used to doing, and it's something that I've honestly never thought I would enjoy doing. But doing uncomfortable things, I think, is a great way for someone to grow. And I guess that's kind of the main reason why I wanted to do it.
Well, that presages a question which I'm going to ask you later. So I don't really want your answer now, but you might want to think about it, because I'm going to ask you later on, did you actually enjoy this? But let's talk about that
Okay.
later. So your dad's heading off the PCT. Something's ignited within you to get ready for the AT. How did you actually start to go about it? Because not having done it before, I'm sure you doubtless went down the YouTube rabbit hole.
Right.
What did that look like to you?
Yeah. So, fortunately, I kind of got some hands-on experience with. It seems like that year he did the PCT, I was out in California and Washington quite a bit, kind of following him along. And I was fortunate to do the last, I guess, from Hart's Pass to the border and back. I think it was like 50 to 60 miles.
Right.
So I got a good taste of it then. In regards to the AT, it was just, I had a pretty strict training program in order to be able to, do the whole thing. But a lot of it was learning from my dad, learning from people on YouTube, from books, from podcasts. But I every morning I kind of did the same thing. I woke up. My brother and I went to the gym for about 2 hours, and an hour and a half of that consisted of lifting weights, trying to get stronger, and then the other half of that, or the other 30 minutes, would be, I'd like to spend quite a bit of time on the Stairmaster, kind of to replicate, elevation gain and stuff. And then,
Do you think it does? Do you think it does?
it's not perfect, but it's better than, I think walking on a treadmill. So, so it definitely helped. I'd like to, I tried to increase the speed, and by the end of it, I'd be dripping in sweat. So,
Yeah, sure.
my first 2-hour session of the day was kind of the same thing every day. And then I'd go home, I'd eat lunch. And then I would go out and hike, usually about 3 miles. I kind of had the same loop I did every day. And, half of that was up and then the other half was down. And, throughout 2 months, most of my training was in December and January. So,
Right.
in the Black Hills, that's the middle of winter. So I got snow, I got 0-degree weather, you name it, I had it. But I would increase my pack weight. I think by the end, by 3 days before I hit Springer, I was probably at 65 pounds. And I knew I had no intentions of carrying that much weight, but, getting myself prepared now would be a lot, would make it a lot easier once the AT came.
And you know what, we've talked about this a lot on the show, how important it is to prepare. And I'm notorious for never having prepared for any of my hikes. So and I always feel the pain, immediately. What was it like for you when you actually did set off? Did you feel prepared? And was that physical? Did you immediately have that physicality?
Yeah, I felt more prepared than, so I got a shuttle up, and a buddy of mine took me up to Amiclola. And I remember, most people, it sounds like they do, 8 7 8 miles their first few days. And, I planned on doing 15, I think, to Gooch Gap. And that was like, you know, everyone was shocked when I was telling them that was kind of what I was
Yeah.
planning. But, fortunately, the first few miles of the AT heading north aren't the toughest, the first 8 or 9.
This,
Um,
whoa, 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 whoa. I did this first when I was 61. Trust me, it was a nightmare. Every 10 yards, I was stopping, gasping for breath.
yeah, I mean, everyone's different, and I'm fortunate that I've got age on my side as well.
Yes.
But, I could not imagine, stepping, getting off the couch and hitting the trail. I mean, that's, to each their own, and that's a good way to get in shape. But I think you'll quickly learn, you'll enjoy the whole thing a lot more, if you came prepared. And it definitely helped. But the weather when I started was my biggest issue. So
I'm going to tell you, you showed a remarkable amount of self-discipline for a young man. And that sounds terribly patronizing. It's not meant to, but
no,
for a young man to have that self-discipline, to know you needed that physical conditioning. So when you got started, you really were quite comfortable. And before we get into the hike itself, your living situation at the time, you'd graduated, I believe, in August 2021. So you had a window of opportunity. What was your timing like when you wanted to start this?
So I knew, I graduated with my undergrad degree in August of 21, and I had aspirations of starting grad school the following August. So I kind of had a year where I had some time off, and a few of those months were spent out on the West Coast. I had a buddy that lived in Nevada, so we'd go out and hike and stuff. And so, I had some time, but I knew I wanted to start fairly early in the year, in order to really to make sure I finished the AT in time, because I knew I needed to be done really before August 1st to head back home to South Dakota and then get everything moved to Florida, which, is a cross country move. So, the time frame really was honestly January if need be to August if that's what needed to be done. So, and that's the big reason why I chose the AT. I mean, it really, the PCT and the CDT, most people seem to start, May, April-ish. And,
Yeah, sure.
and people do that on the AT, but in order to really make sure I had the amount of time needed, I just wanted to start a little earlier. And that's why the AT came in handy.
And just before you started, I'm sure your dad must have been helpful in your preparations. Did he give you any significant advice that really resonated with you once you're out there?
Yeah, I mean, everything I've learned, not only in my personal life, but, outdoors wise and everything he taught me. And I remember the first time I told him that I wanted to do, the AT. It was right at the end of the PCT. I think we were heading back to Hart's Pass. And I said, I want to do the AT. And he was completely supportive, but he told me two things that I think I tell every aspiring hiker now is, first of all, you're going to hurt every single day. Something on you is going to be in pain. And, you got to understand that going in.
Yes.
And then second of all, it's kind of like a 90% of a mental challenge more so than it's physical. I think everyone thinks about the physical aspect, but, as a thru hiker and people who've done it, I think, as as well, it's the mental challenges are a lot more, a lot tougher to overcome than the physical ones. So he gave me tips with, regarding food, how much to carry, gear. Fortunately, a lot of the gear kind of built up over time with him hiking and, our canoe trips and stuff. So, everything I know today, hiking wise and, personally was taught by my parents, especially, hiking wise came from him. So it's nice to have a mentor like that for sure.
That's awesome. I agree with you. You can't get enough experience, can you? Until you actually get on the top of Springer Mountain and do step number 1, then number 2, then number 3, then number 484,000. You can't really get that experience until you live that experience, can you?
Exactly.
You can have all sorts of advice pointing you the way, but you really have to live that experience. So you set off, you started your hike on the AT on February the 4th this year. This is what made me laugh, actually. You obviously felt quite comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
You said you were thinking of doing a 15-mile day. You got to Hot Springs within 2 darn weeks. It took me about 2 months to get to Hot Springs when I did it. So what happened? You got there, but then you went home. So tell me what happened. Was it the weather?
So the weather was a part of it. And honestly, my first few weeks, I didn't really enjoy the experience. I was A big reason why I wanted to do the AT was the people. Obviously, I was kind of around a few people on the PCT when he was doing it, and
Sure.
that's kind of what captured my attention is the people that you're with. And when you start that early, there's very few people on trail, and there's pros to that, but also I think the cons for me outweighed that. And I remember my first night, I was at Gooch Gap Shelter, and the sun goes down at like it seems like 5 o'clock in February. So
Yeah.
I think I started hiking at like 9:30 or 10 that morning and got there and set my tent up, and it was the temperature was fine. It was wet my first day, so everything was wet. I remember waking up my first morning on trail, and it was like 15 degrees. There was snow on the ground. My socks were frozen, like they were frozen solid from being wet. My shoes were frozen.
Happy days.
Oh yeah, I couldn't put my feet in them, so I had to turn my stove on and thaw them out. But I woke up that morning like, man, this is going to be a long few months, and I think I kind of hit my breaking point in Hot Springs. I called my dad and I was like, I'm done with this, and I flew home a few days later. And I think the weather played a part, but also I knew if I wanted to finish as a thru hike, knowing when Katahdin opens, I probably would have gotten there a lot earlier and had to have gone home for a few weeks anyway.
Yeah.
So, looking back, it all worked out. But I remember getting back home and, within a week, I was just like, I was very upset at myself. Quitting is not in my vocabulary. So, the thought of getting off trail and claiming, oh, I'll do it in sections was really kind of upsetting me. So
I'm sure.
I gave it a few weeks and hopped back on, and it was probably the best thing I've done.
And so when you got off, the day you got off at Hot Springs, you were not intending to come back?
So I was intending to, I was claiming I was going to do it in sections. Now, whether that would have happened or not, I don't know. And the people that I did meet, I would see them posting pictures on social media and whatnot. And I was just so upset at myself, because one day I do want to have children, and I want my kids to, once you start something, I've always been taught once you start something, you got to finish it. So, I took that approach to this, and I was, getting home for, 7 weeks was unbelievable. I kind of got to appreciate what trail life was like, but also what family life and what the comforting things of home are like.
Yeah. Do you know what? That's not a bad reset to have, don't you think? It allows you to look at things in a slightly different perspective and makes you realize the value of what you had out there and what you have at home.
It does. And I think honestly, that break is really it changed my whole outlook on hiking in general. And without that, I don't think I would have finished it as a thru hike. And, everything worked out in the end, and I'm happy about that. So,
yeah. And you got back on at Hot Springs on the 13th of April, I believe. And that was just at Hot Springs.
Yeah.
And you finished just over 2.5 months later. So you were on trail for 94 days. Were you once you got back on, had your mindset changed? This is head down now, no messing about. I'm going to get this done, because you told me you had no 0 days.
Yeah.
That's almost beyond belief for me. So what was the rationale behind that?
So the no 0 days really came, I especially, talking with my dad and then seeing people on trail, a lot of people kind of get trapped in town. They call it this vortex where you go into town.
Indeed.
And you live this luxury lifestyle of anything you want to eat, a shower, a bed. And, for me, the time I spent in town was enjoyable. And obviously I would have done anything to have stayed there. But, physically there weren't, there were a few days, especially when I got back on trail, that I probably could have used a 0, and I really was tempted to do it. But for me, knowing that I had this goal, and the goal was really to reach the end, I wanted to get to Katahdin. That's, when I started this thing, that, you hear about, this big K word, and you picture it. But the steps that it takes to get there is challenging. And for me, I had a feeling if I would have taken a 0, the first thing I wanted, I wouldn't have wanted to get back on trail. So I kind of took the Nero approach. And Nero's for me kind of were, 20, 25 mile days, and I'd get into town. And
but a Nero is about 3 miles for me.
and I think my shortest day was probably like 7 miles, but
Slacker.
yeah. So it all worked out in the end. And I think, doing it, if I were to do it again, I don't know, maybe I would take it a little slower, but everything worked out, and I'm happy I didn't take zeros. Cool. It's interesting now to say I didn't take any zeros. I just felt
Yeah.
like my mindset was I have to keep moving, and
Wow. And it's a pretty solitary hike, isn't it? Because and once again, hopefully this doesn't sound patronising, but for young men and young women tend to like to socialise on the trail and so on. Was it always your intention to be fairly solo, or because you're going so fast, it happened out of necessity?
yeah, I mean, going in, and that was why I struggled the first 2 weeks because I wanted to build this big trail family. You see people
Right.
on
Sure.
social media; they all have these big groups, and that was my intention. And I always figured it would come. I mean, and granted, I met some amazing people, but for me, it kind of I had the approach that I had no intentions of forcing or wanting anyone to change the way they hike to keep up with me, and I had no
Sure.
interest in doing the same back. So if I would have found a group that I stuck with that we all did the same mileage, I probably would have, latched on and went forward. But for me, it was, and towards the end, I think when I hit the halfway point, probably around Virginia, maybe, so a little under halfway, I appreciated being alone. I'd stay at shelters here and there, but I just enjoyed walking. And then, when I got tired, I literally would go right or left of the trail and throw the tent down on the flattest spot. And that solitude that there's not many times in life where you get to be with your own thoughts and be alone, and appreciate just being alone and being quiet, and that's something I really
But that's not
enjoyed.
always a positive experience, is it? There are times when you can get down on yourself quite a bit. And when we spoke before, in fact, you've already mentioned it. You had a lot of down days, you told me, and that you called your father or your twin brother. Was that to talk you down off the ledge or encourage you to continue? Why did you do that?
I think it was a mix of both. Out there, I didn't really have anyone to talk to other than a few friends and my family. So looking back now, I feel bad, especially for my dad and my brother, because I'd call them sometimes being extremely upset. And the days that really I struggled was when it was crappy weather. It was raining
Yeah,
or cold,
yeah.
and so I think I called them as a sense of having someone familiar to talk to, and especially my dad. It's nice because he's been through it, and
Sure.
you know, I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't want to quit every single day. I mean, there's days where, you wake up and doing the same thing over and over and over again. We get used to doing in our daily life, but it's different when you're out there and you're walking. And it's all about, one step, one foot in front of the other. And I think, calling them, having them to lean on, I don't think I would have finished the hike without having them around. So it was almost like they were there with me.
Sure. You know what? That's a lovely thing to have as well, because then you still are hiking your hike. You've got that support as well.
Yeah.
But you were quite intense about it. You said you're up at 4:30 most mornings. You're hiking by 5:15. How you get out of camp in 45 minutes, I have no idea. But you weren't done till about 6:30. And this is the question I was sort of said I was going to ask earlier on. Would you say that you actually enjoyed this hike?
If you would have asked me, even the day I did Katahdin, there were aspects of the hike that I did enjoy, without a doubt. Getting to meet incredible people, getting to see incredible things, and really living this simple lifestyle is incredible. But I don't think until after the hike, probably within a week, that I started getting this itch to want to be back on trail. And
Amazing, isn't it?
it's the weirdest thing because I
Yeah.
had no interest in doing anything else like that again. But literally within a week of being done, I literally became obsessed with being out on trail. I mean, you get back to your real life and being around family and friends is nice. But it's different being out there. And I think, I feel like there were more days that I did not enjoy myself than I did. But those days where, you put your head on your pillow at night, usually my pillow was deflated and my sleeping pad was being deflated as well. So that made things a little different. But it really puts life in perspective, and I was really appreciative of the opportunity. So looking back now, I don't think I enjoyed it in the moment, but now it's like, of course I enjoyed it, I think so.
Of course, I enjoyed it. I think that doesn't sound like the
I
most
know,
ringing
I know. It's
endorsement.
it's 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 hard to explain, but I even to this day I have that itch to be back out. So
Do you know what, man? I think what's special about talking to you about this, and it's only come up really since I've asked the questions, really, that having your father and saying that you had your father and your brother along with you, that's a really special part of it, I would think, for you, that you can look back on it, that support was what got you to Katahdin. And that is something to really, really value as life goes on.
It is. And I think, it was a lot more than them. My uncle was kind of my weatherman. He would send me morning, night, and even midday weather updates every day. So I couldn't have done it without him. And just, uncles, cousins, aunts, friends, everyone was incredibly supportive. And it's, yeah, maybe I was the one who took every step, but really there was it was a big team effort. And,
of course,
that's the way I've taken this.
And I know that you encountered some pretty special trail magic along the way. Tell us about Bear Mountain, New York.
Yeah. So this is a day that, I continue to look back on. So, Bear Mountain's a pretty popular, mountain to climb, especially for tourists. And at this point, it was kind of
endless downhill at the end.
It is a long downhill, but luckily the trail's graded or it's manicured well.
Yes.
But right as I was about to start my northbound climb up Bear Mountain, I ran into probably a group of about 15 hikers who later I'd find out they were kind of a big Facebook group that did go out and hike New York and Connecticut, hiking trails. And they were fascinated by me and kind of what I was doing. And they gave me a bunch of like bars and snacks. I mean, I ate like 15 candy bars and stuff that day from them. So, we talked for a while and then they kind of went their way and I went mine up Bear Mountain, and I got down on the other side. And there's, that beautiful lake there. There's that big lodge and there's a few picnic areas.
Yeah.
And I was sitting at a picnic table, kind of eating a snack because it was like 3:00, I think. I don't know. I probably did like 18 miles up until that point. I wanted to do a few more, but there's this massive storm coming in. I mean, you could see this huge cloud moving in, and
what your uncle has sent you the weather forecast.
Yeah, he did, and that's why I was trying to figure out what the best plan of action was. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get wet either way. So I packed my stuff up and started walking along the waterfront there. And this is right before you kind of get into the zoo that you walk through. And this lady came running over to me, and I noticed they were having this big picnic. And she's like, hey, come over and get some food. Then I later came to realize it was the same group I saw right before I started climbing Bear Mountain.
Nice.
And, they had this unbelievable feast. It was kind of the group leader's birthday. So, they opened their little picnic area up for me to celebrate with them. And then I noticed this one lady kind of was on the phone, and she came walking back to me, and everyone was asking me kind of what I was going to do for the night. And, it started raining, and she's like, hey, I just talked to my husband, and you should come home with us and stay at our couch, and, we'll feed you and do laundry. And, she mentioned she had 2 daughters who were kind of my age. So I was very skeptical going in because I didn't want to put these poor, these 2 girls in this weird position where this somewhat homeless dude is walking in and
smelly homeless dude, no doubt. Yeah. On their couch.
Yeah. Going to be sleeping on the couch. But, Beth was incredible. And her husband and 2 daughters were unbelievable. They fed me, they did laundry, and, it was just, and it rained all night. And the next morning it rained all morning. So, things like that really, I mean, it puts life in perspective. I think, for me, especially if you watch the news or, anything, it's everything seems so negative. And,
sure.
And having that was, I think it was my single favorite day on trail, just because of,
nice.
These kind people who had no idea who I was, opened their house to me. And, it was nice because at the end of the hike up in Katahdin, I summited with my dad, and, they were all up in Maine, actually, at kind of like on a family vacation. So we got to get together for a day and hang out. And, their kindness and generosity is something that I'll never forget. Unfortunately, we still keep in touch to this day. So, one day, hopefully, maybe if I end up living on the East Coast near the trail, I definitely want to do something like that. So.
Well, you just mentioned that you summited Katahdin with your dad, and I didn't actually know that from my notes before. So you didn't go up by yourself. That must have been pretty special to summit Katahdin with your dad. Was it a good day? Because you went up in June. Was it June 29th it was?
Yeah.
So what was it like?
It was the perfect day you could do Katahdin. Clear skies, and temperatures were nice. It was a little windy, but I feel like if you're up at Katahdin, there's always going to be a
Yes.
nice breeze.
Yeah.
But it worked out perfect because he flew out a few days before. When he did the trail in 93, I remember seeing his summit picture, and you can't even see him because it's cloudy and rainy and windy. Like you could barely make out a figure of a person.
Right.
So it was really cool, and I was almost more happy that he was there with me because this is kind of his summit too. While he did summit in 93, he didn't see any views, he didn't see anything. So I was almost more happy that he was there with me to not only end my journey, but I feel like kind of put a cherry on top for him as well.
I bet it did. Look, I'm gonna finish up now with asking you what listeners have come to know as my Betty questions.
Okay.
Because one of my friends is going to be hiking next year, and she's got these questions for thru-hikers. 5 quick questions and answers. Okay.
Perfect.
What did you love about the hike?
I think the simple aspect of life out there, while that can be a negative thing at times, I think waking up and all the focus is walking now being in school and stuff and having priorities, it's nice to be able to enjoy that for a few months for sure.
Yeah. Having no options is great, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Nothing else to do.
Yeah.
So.
And what did you hate about it?
Oh my gosh. The rain, I absolutely hate rain.
So hiking the Appalachian Trail for 6 months isn't your idea of fun then?
No,
because you're going to get rain all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And I love Washington State, but I could never live there because it just rains. And putting on wet clothes every day was horrible. Chafing was horrible. I could go on, but I'd probably say the rain was the toughest part dealing with that.
And what would you do differently if you were ever to do it again?
I feel like everything kind of worked out. I could sit here and say maybe I would start a few weeks later and not start early February. But those 2 weeks at the beginning, I got to see everything weather-wise, so that worked out.
And also, it's worth mentioning. You just mentioned that because it worked out. At the end of the day, you stood on Katahdin, and so whatever you did to get there worked for you, didn't it?
Exactly, and I think looking back, that puts everything in perspective. It's hard to say I would do anything differently. Maybe I would switch out my sleeping bag when it got warmer because I'd wake up every night, drenched in sweat. But
yes.
It's those little things. It all. You look back on it now and it's like, oh, it really wasn't that bad. So
it was really though.
Yeah, in the moment
at the time.
Sure.
Yeah, it's right. And was there anything you wish you'd known before you started?
Fortunately having my dad to kind of teach, show me the ropes, it helped. Maybe knowing how much, of a mental game it actually is. Cause having someone tell you that in person is, it's a lot easier said than done, which is what most people say. But, there's a lot of mental obstacles that you have to go through. I wish I probably would have done more shakedown hikes and would have done that, known that to do that before. I did a lot of day hikes, but,
sure.
I guess if I had a tip for somebody, especially if you live near the AT, I'd recommend going out for a week, picking a week where you're going to get all sorts of weather.
Yeah.
And seeing if you like it, because it's a lot different once you hit Springer. And
it's certainly not for everybody. And because of the popularity of the trail, a lot of people who are totally unprepared get out on there and they stop within a few miles. So,
they do. And I think a big part of that is because, people go out and do, an overnighter when it's a beautiful day out, when in reality, that's not going to be, your daily life. So if you can go out for a week and pick a cold day, pick a rainy day, pick a nice day, and if you go home after that week and say, man, I want to do this, well, then I think you picked the right thing to do. If not, maybe it's not for you. So,
yeah. And what was your number one choice of gear? What was your best choice of gear?
It's going to sound weird. Probably my shoes. I don't know if you've ever had that answer before, but I think, I had Olympus trail running shoes and, they're very padded. They're lightweight. They dried quick. It took me about 4 different pairs of shoes before I started the AT to realize which pair fit me.
Sure.
And these, I had to switch them out. The only con is they only last about 500 to 600 miles, but they're comfortable and probably that. I love my tent, my big 3 I love. So fortunately having my dad there to, teach me all the gear stuff too worked out.
Yeah, you're lucky, I tell you, man, to have somebody to teach you all that. Yeah. I learned everything from making mistakes in the first place. So what's next for you then? What are you going to do next?
So right now I'm kind of, I'm itching to get back on trail, oddly enough, focused on finishing up grad school. So, maybe when I'm done with that, I'd like to get back out there. Again, I've always, as I mentioned earlier, I like to do something bigger. And, the CDT and the PCT are both bigger, and I'm going to do those one day. But who knows? Maybe, knowing me, maybe I'll have this desire to do both of them in a year, or do all three of these trails in a year. We'll see. I don't know. Something to push me and
it's doable. There are people out there right now doing a Katahdin Triple Crown.
I pondered the idea with my dad, and I think it's something that I could do. But I'm also trying to get set up for my future. I do want to have children one day, so I'm trying to do a lot of this fun stuff.
Do not rush into that. Son.
No, I know. I'm trying to do a lot of this fun stuff when I'm young, because everyone kind of goes from high school to college to med school or law school, or even just to a job. And
sure.
I think it's important to appreciate, for me at least, being young and being physically able to do this stuff. So
I've got to tell you, you're a very mature young man, and I love the way you've answered these questions. I really appreciate you coming on the show, because I think you've given a perspective we don't often hear. The younger person doing it, who really knows what he's doing, who's worked out what to do. So I really thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Steve. I had a good time.
Okay, appreciate it. Take it easy, okay?
Yep. All right, take care.
Cheers then. Bye. What a mature, humble young man, eh? He was so prepared, but when he got out there, he was mature enough to recognise it just wasn't working for him. So he went home, regrouped, missed the trail so much, and then got back on. And to have had the support of his family in that way, he was able to get through. I was very impressed by him, as you could probably tell. Now, and way long overdue, we've got some thank yous to get through. Here goes. I want to thank monthly donors Todd Withrow, Sabre Thompson, Suzanne Johnson, Betty McInerney, John Krautler, Ann Pickens, Sean Deadwiley, Emmanuel Bravo Ramos, Alan Troy, Jessica Diaz, Hugh Ickrath, Michelle Brown, Justin Mullins, Kevin Eastman, Ann Dobson, Mike DiCello, Jens Lipperheider, Lisa Rana and Brian Helton Jr. Also, we got generous donations from Eric Gross and Beth Backer-Stenahum, a couple of my TSX Challenge partners, along with Michelle Brown, by the way, Mary Marks and John Park. Additionally, Scott Cuvellier donated, and I wanted to tell you what he wrote. I enjoy many of the podcasts on the HRN, as I'm here in Iowa building John Deere tractors. Your pods get me outdoors while on the factory floor. I'd like my donation to be sent Courtney's way, as her family is currently dealing with Hurricane Ian. That is so nice of you, Scott. I've already told Courtney, and she is extremely touched by your gesture. Of course, I'll be sending your donation her way. Thanks to all of you for your support. And if you want to give value for the value that you feel we give you, then go to the HRN website and click on one of the donate buttons. Cheers. Now let's hear from my friend, Diane Sager, better known as Lady Di. Well, today we're going to have the first of our middle section about hostels. I could think of nobody I'd like to speak to more than Lady Di, who I hiked with in 2019 and who crazily decided to open a hostel after that. Hey, Lady Di, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Well, I'm pretty good, and I've never understood why anybody would want to run a hostel. It must be such hard work. And having stayed at your hostel a few times coming up to trail days, I can see how hard you work. So I've given a bit of a clue, but tell everybody where your hostel is to start with.
So it's a block and a half off the trail in Damascus, Virginia.
How about that? A block and a half. And when you went through Damascus in 2019, did you know the town already, or was it something that attracted you straight away?
No, I had never been there. And actually, when I was here in 2019, I think I kind of bougie blazed and did a lot of zeros and slack packing. So I think I was in Damascus for 2 or 3 nights.
In the vortex,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I remember saying to somebody, "This is a cute little town. I can imagine living in a place like this." I mean, it was certainly not in my intentions at that time. And I had never been in the hospitality industry in my life.
You weren't a natural as such, but I can see from seeing you in your element there, you like being surrounded by people. You seem to like being surrounded by people. So you say you weren't in the hospitality industry, right? But you knew what to do, didn't you, really?
Well, that's right. So when I thru hiked, I actually retired and cleaned my office out on a Friday and stood on Springer that was in Minneapolis, and then stood
Yeah.
on Springer the following Thursday and spent about 7 months through hiking the trail. And so then when I went home after the trail, it wasn't too long until COVID hit, and I kind of sat around for a winter getting completely bored.
Yeah.
Even there was even some part-time stuff I had lined up to do in retirement that COVID killed. So I had literally nothing to do.
Wow.
And so I really missed the trail community and the experience of the trail. So I packed up my dog and came down to Damascus to do a little hiking, and I got shuttled out and spent a few days hiking, and there was a for sale sign in front of this big house.
It's a big house as well, isn't it?
It is, yeah. 2,700 square feet, 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms. At least that's what the listing said. So one thing led to another, and I ended up buying it and opening a hostel. And although I've never been in the hospitality industry before, like I said, I bougie blazed, and I stayed in every hostel I got with arm's length of, when I was on trail.
Right,
and so
yeah.
I felt very confident that I know what a hiker needs when they come into town, because I went into every town I could. I slack packed as much as I could, and I stayed in hostels as often as I could.
So for a hiker to come to Lady Di's B&B now, not so much what do they get, what's their experience like coming to you?
So, I mean, I'm in Guthook and AWOL, or Far Out, whatever they call it now, Guthook, and on Google Maps and stuff. And so I have to say I have almost universally positive reviews, but it isn't rocket science. I have a comfortable house. It's very clean. I've got multiple bathrooms. I've got good mattresses. And I even had this one guy on his YouTube blog was ranting about my high thread count Egyptian cotton sheets. And then I make a big homemade breakfast. I make my own bread and all that kind of stuff. I make a big homemade breakfast and feed them a lot. And that's what hikers need.
But we all had bad days on the trail. Not always, but we did have bad days on the trail from time to time. So do you have bad days as hosting a B&B? Or do you not allow yourself to?
Yeah. I mean, some days are better than others, but a bad day on the trail is still better than a good day in the office, as they say, right?
Yeah, of course.
So I noticed one day, so the real bubble is the northbound thru-hiker bubble when I'm full and I stay full. And I remember looking at my calendar one day and figuring out that it had been 12 weeks, a little over 12 weeks since I had not started cooking breakfast at 5:30 in the morning, 7 days a week, dear. 7 days a week. Right. But I love it. And I love that it's seasonal, because I can close in the winter and stuff like that. And I've told people, I could never do this 365 days a year. I'd start killing people or something, But I love it when it's happening.
By the way, there is a picture that exists, the only picture in my clear knowledge of me with a dog. And it's Duke? Right. With Duke. You took a picture of me stroking Duke. And I said,
the Duke of Damascus. Yes. You were cuddling my dog, and you're not a dog person. I do have that. Yep.
Yes, quite remarkable it was to me. And, we hear about entitled thru-hikers. Is that your experience?
Not at all. Not at all.
I don't think so either. But
thru-hikers are my peeps. If anything, I think that there are times it's because I'm Lady Di's bed and breakfast is also on the transcontinental, what is it called? Trans-America Bike Trail.
Yeah.
It's a bicycle route that goes coast to coast right past my front door, and there are races and stuff they run. So I get bicyclists, and then this is also the southern end of the BDR, the Backcountry Discovery Route, which is a motorcycle route. So sometimes I get like motorcycle dudes too.
You get bikers as well.
Yeah. Bikers and hikers, and they're kind of fascinated by each other. And if anything, thru-hikers are absolutely my peeps because I really kind of run my bed and breakfast like a hostel. And I kind of notice when somebody gets in the shower and stays there for 30 minutes and stuff. That's not thru-hikers that do that. That's other people.
Funny. So can you see yourself doing this for a long time, or is this something that you think this is a 5-year project, 10-year project? Because I know that Before I came last time to Trail Days, you were excavating down below the house, weren't you? You found a wine cellar or something.
I found a root cellar. I found a root cellar under my house that was just full of junk and rotting food in jars and stuff, and I cleared it all out. The hard thing is you have to kind of crawl on your knees for about 3 feet before you under the deck before you can get to the stairs to go down there. But yes, and I have some people building a kind of a she shed in my backyard right now, because it's a wonderful house, but it's all living space. So there's no place to kind of make a mess or anything. So I don't have a garage or a basement or anything. So that's going on right now. But I think I forgot your question.
Is this something you think you're going to be doing for a long time? Because there's a lot going on always. There's always a lot going on.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to, well, I don't know. As long as I stay healthy. I mean, I turned 64 on trail. I'm 67 now. So I'm not going to be doing this forever, but as long as I'm having fun, I'm going to keep doing it. And I'm probably going to be a little bit more aggressive about closing and taking time for myself and stuff. I went back to Minnesota for a couple of weeks in August when it was slow. And I think I'm going to be a reverse snowbird and go to Minnesota in the wintertime.
Oh my gosh.
That's where I moved from.
That is very reverse. That's right. Has your family been down to the hostel or the B&B?
Yeah, my kids have. My sister has. Yeah, my brother and sister-in-law have. Yeah, absolutely.
And unlike me, I've sort of carried on hiking. I know you go for walks with Duke every day. Mm-hmm. You going to hike again, do you think?
I don't think I have a through hike in me. I could see going out for a month at a time or something like that. I mean, I've thought about that. I'm not heading for a triple crown.
Triple crown could be better. You could be going for that way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. We might end up crippled. I could see maybe doing Washington State or something, or a big chunk of a trail, or even going back out on the AT. I've got one of my traveling members that we talk about wanting to do Maine again, because by the end of the trail, I was so tired and so exhausted. I mean, at the end, you're just pushing miles and you just want to get done. And I don't think I really appreciated it. Maine's so beautiful. I'd like to go hike Maine again or something like that.
I wouldn't do that on fresh legs. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but I can go slow.
That would be a nightmare. Well, look, I'm so glad you decided to do the hostel, because you've become my home away from home when I go to Trail Days now. So obviously I'll be back again, hopefully next year as well. Yeah. But I appreciate you coming on the show to tell us about it. I'm glad you're doing great. Where can they find you? Where can people find you?
Where can people find me? Oh, do you mean on Facebook and stuff? I've got a Facebook web. Lady Di's Bed and Breakfast. I've got a web page, and
okay. I'll put the link. I'll put that link in the show notes as well. Then
in Damascus, there's a where to stay place on their website, and then I'm in Gut Hook and AWOL, so far out rather. So
cool,
yeah.
cool. Okay.
I'm easy to find, right on the trail almost.
Well, it's lovely to see you again, and so hopefully I'll see you next May, and you can take that booking now if you like. And
okay.
I appreciate you coming on the show to share it with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers,
you,
then.
Steve. Yeah,
bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Love Lady Di. I mean it. She is my home away from home, and her place is terrific memories for me since I've been back to Trail Days. Remember, I want to speak to other hostel owners, so make sure you send me your favourites and I'll try to get them on the show. Finally today, George Stefanos is approaching the quarterway point of the AT. That's quite a moment, and takes in one of my favourite spots on the trail, Chestnut Knob. I'll see you next week. Sunday the 12th of June 1983, mile 521.3. 12:35 p.m, mile 510.4. I decided to get in a little early journal writing. I actually got off to an early start this morning. Before 6:30, as the first faint blue twilight tinged the blackness, I was gone. The woods were at their prettiest in those fleeting moments before sunrise. I promised myself that I would try to get early starts more often. Shortly after dawn, while a scattering of brighter stars yet contested the waxing daylight, I passed through a grove of old trees whose trunks stood like tall pillars of obsidian, straight and black, silhouetted against a silver early morning mist. At that moment, the rising sun peeked over the horizon, painting the scene with a rich golden backlighting. The blending of the gold and silver light brought to my mind the mingling of the light of the two trees of Valinor in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion. It touched me to discover that this light has not forsaken the world completely with their demise. The trail departed the grove and emerged into a high pasture touched by that same mythical luminosity. A small herd of cattle was grazing far to my right, floating dimly in silver-gold mists which clung to the slopes and contours of the field, concealing the ground below and washing out the horizon. It was an unearthly sight. It looked like cow heaven. The morning became ordinary as the sun rose and the magic faded. The woods and the footpath were pleasant, except for one lousy, buggy section of second-growth forest through which I passed on a steep and rocky climb up Brushy Mountain. That stretch only lasted for about a mile before the AT entered a more mature, less claustrophobic woodland and began to follow the level crest of the mountain. I have been at the Mount Rogers National Recreation Area Visitor Centre since about noon. Located directly upon the Appalachian Trail, it features a bulletin board crammed with information specifically concerning the AT, including the locations of 3 new lean-tos, filling in a huge gap which had existed in the shelter system due to a relocation several years ago, removing the AT from the long ridge crest of Big Walker Mountain. It also gives the location of a church offering shelter to hikers. An outside tap at the visitor centre provides water for hikers, and a picnic table stands a few yards away in a small clearing. I'm writing this entry at that table, having just completed a sumptuous tang and peanut butter cracker lunch. In 5 minutes it will be 1 o'clock and I will be out of here. I have covered just over 10 miles this morning and 11 miles remain to the motel. 9 o'clock, mile 521.3. After the visitor centre, the Appalachian Trail was very rough and poorly blazed compared to the usual standard of trail in Virginia. The crest of Brushy Mountain blazed with most awesome displays of azalea and rhododendron I'd yet seen. Long rows of rhododendron trees, all about 15 feet high and bursting with pink-violet blossoms, lined either side of the AT. Combined with the deep, startling oranges of the azalea, this made for some rather colourful hiking. I traversed 2 other mountains this afternoon, featuring mature forests carpeted with moss and ferns and sporting occasional explosions of rhododendron blossoms. The one viewpoint of the entire day was a spot named Glade Mountain Overlook, where a long bench in a small, sunny clearing provided a rhododendron-framed vista of small farms and wooded hills. Fat bumblebees droned in the torpid summery air. Although not spectacular, it made for a pleasant interlude. The humidity had been steadily increasing over the past several days, and the temperature rose to around 90 degrees this afternoon. I was fairly spent when I reached the Glade Mountain shelter at 4:30 after 17 steamy miles. Nevertheless, I was determined to tackle the 4 remaining miles to the motel. The thought of a long shower and restaurant food was just what I needed to keep plugging away. I left the shelter at 5:30. An abundance of sharp rocks along the trail this afternoon had left my feet in sad shape. The final 2 miles to the motel trod paved rural roads. That allowed me to fly along, but the hard service completed the destruction of my poor feet. Despite aches and fatigue, I enjoyed that road walk. I met a few nice local people, and the even surface allowed me to put my legs on an automatic pilot, lose myself in thought, and savour the sights of quiet farms and forests. I reached US 11 and the motel at 7 o'clock. The next few hours were fantastic. It seemed almost decadent having that bathroom all to myself, but I got over it. I cannot describe how wonderful a shower felt after 21 miles of sweat bath. When I was done, I shaved for the first time since Fontana Dam, put on my second set of clothes, which I always attempt to hold back clean and unworn in my pack for just such an occasion, and headed over to the restaurant. I wolfed down a T-bone, hot rolls with butter, a generous helping from the salad bar, some strawberry pie and several cold cokes. I noticed that many of these restaurants down south give you free refills on soda as well as coffee. I like that. The grocery in Atkins is 3 or 4 miles down the road from here. I hope to purchase my food and be back on the Appalachian Trail by noon in order to hike at least 10 miles tomorrow. Then it will be on to Pearisburg. By the way, I'm staying tonight at the Village Motel, located near the junction of US 11 and I-81 in the village of Grosclose, in the town of Rural Retreat, Virginia. There was no reason for me to mention that, except that I like the sound of those names. Maybe I'll stroll on over to Hooterville later. Monday, the 13th of June, 1983, mile 533.6. Wanting to be at that grocery store in Atkins just as it opened at 7 o'clock, I went to bed last night at 9 o'clock, immediately after dinner. Things did not quite work out the way I had planned. The bed was so comfortable that I didn't wake up until after 7. I guess I must have needed the sleep. Not getting enough may be the main reason I've been feeling so run down lately, and may help to explain much of my recent depression. I know that I spend long hours on the trail for a hiker, thus far only averaging less than 13 miles per day, mostly due to painstaking photography and frequent side trips. Since I also spend hours at night on lengthy, detailed journal entries, all this cuts cruelly into my sleeping and relaxation time. Nevertheless, this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Even should I ever again decide to hike the Appalachian Trail, that trip will not have the same significance as this quest. I want to see and experience all that I have the desire for, and to remember as much of it as possible in the years to come. I'm not willing to sacrifice these objectives merely to make my task easier. As long as I'm trying to reverse a lifetime of taking the easy way out in one summer, I may as well take it to the hilt. No mercy. I left my room at 7:30. The hitch into Atkins was a rather miserable experience. The store was about 3.5 miles from my motel. Many cars passed, but none even slowed down as I walked the first 3 miles. When I finally got a ride, the fellow who picked me seemed to know even less about the town than I. He eventually dropped me off a mile past the store. Thus, I was actually in worse shape after the ride. It was 8:45 when I finally reached the store. The morning was slipping away without anything being accomplished. Although small, the store stocked all the everyday items which I use as substitutes for expensive pre-packaged backpacking foods. My one disappointment, but truly a cruel one, was that they did not carry frosted Pop-Tarts, so I had to get the plain ones. I handled that disappointment like a man, though. I only sulked for about an hour. I bought my supplies and stood outside the store, determined to ride all the way back to the motel. 5 minutes later, 2 guys in a pickup pulled over for me. They probably did not get invited to many Chambers of Commerce picnics and such. A rifle lay between them in the front seat, and they were each guzzling from quart bottles of beer at 9:15 in the morning. But they went out of their way to drop me off right in front of my room when all those solid citizens had just blown right by me this morning. I was back in my room at 9:30. I spent about a half hour loading my pack, then walked over to partake in another large restaurant meal. I kicked back in my room until checkout time and left the motel at 11 o'clock. A gas station with a small convenience store was a short distance down the AT road walk from the motel. I had not even known it was there when I hitched all the way to Atkins for groceries. The limited stock didn't include everything I needed, so the trip to town was not a total waste. I was able, however, to pick up salt and peanuts, 2 items I had forgotten in Atkins. They also carried frosted Pop-Tarts, but it was too late. I already had the other ones. No frosted Pop-Tarts now until Petersburg. I wish I were dead. On a slightly less tragic note, the thermometer once again flirted with the 90-degree mark today, and there I was hitting the trail at 11:30, just as the hottest hours of the day were beginning. It is hard enough to get going again with a full load of supplies after a night of living in the lap of luxury. I did not need the extra handicap. At the outset, I staggered pathetically along, unable to maintain even that pace for long without stopping. It took me 4 miles and 2 very long rest stops before the mileage machine finally started to kick in. The Appalachian Trail was a varied and interesting experience this afternoon. The first mile followed paved state roads through the remainder of the broad farming valley bisected by the interstate. It was a nice road walk. I passed scores of cows, several horses, a few pigs and acres of pasture. The second mile was on private dirt roads through a very large farm. I passed numerous outbuildings, goats, more cows, fields of hay and an extremely pretty lady in shorts and a halter top hanging clothes. You probably can deduce which of these was my scenic highlight for this section. The farm roads were picturesque, but the blazing mark in the route was terrible. There were many side roads not mentioned in the guidebook, and the turns were poorly marked. The final turn was not marked at all, and I walked about a half mile out of my way before I turned back and found the correct road. The owners of that farm must be great folks. Not only do they allow the Appalachian Trail to pass right through their property, but they fixed up a tin shed with a mattress, a stove and a picnic table for hikers to use as a shelter. One hiker left a notebook there for a shelter register, and I read entry after entry written by hikers who stayed there and were paid a visit by the owners late at night, given much beer and a memorable good time. Had I not covered only about 2 miles to that point, I would have been tempted to stay the night. Things had been just a little quiet since Dave and I parted. Shortly after passing the shelter, the AT left that dirt road and entered the woods. It climbed over a ridge called Brushy Mountain, the second of that name I had encountered in the past 2 days, descended very steeply and ascended very steeply to the crest of Gwilliam Mountain. The crests of both mountains were massive rhododendron gardens. From Gwilliam, the Appalachian Trail descended, steeply again, along a spur ridge into Crawfish Valley, a wilderness of impenetrable rhododendron thickets surrounding a large stream. Then it climbed Big Walker Mountain on a well-graded trail. Up until 3 years ago, the AT had turned right and followed the crest of Big Walker for many miles, but barely a trace of the old crestline trail was visible. Today, the AT reaches the top and immediately descends the opposite slope into the next valley. The Forest Service apparently had built a narrow corridor for the AT coming off the mountain. For a half mile, the trail passed between 2 fence lines running only about 50 feet apart. Farm fields lay beyond the fences on either side. Next came some more road walking, which is not unpleasant in southern Virginia. You see many attractive little farms, and the locals are very friendly. Motorists all wave to you, and people you meet pass the time of day. Being from the northeast, my right middle finger still starts an automatic salute when a passing motorist honks, but then I remember where I am and turn the gesture into a friendly wave. I had a nice talk with an elderly farmer who was sitting on his porch. He told me that the weather is going to remain hot and sunny all week. I said hello to one lady who spent the next 15 minutes telling me about her brother, whom she had just buried. I could think of nothing to say that would comfort her, but I sensed that she just needed me to listen. This sort of thing is beginning to happen to me more and more lately. People look into my eyes and see something there that makes them want to pour out amazingly personal stuff to a total stranger. Damn, I must be turning into a nice guy. How did that happen? The downside of road walks is that pavement can be hard on your feet at the end of a long day, and these shadeless farm roads can become quite hot. I felt pretty used up by the time I followed State Road 42 past the Olistery Community Picnic Shelter, a large pavilion with a roof, open sides and several picnic tables inside. The local people graciously welcome hikers to stay here, which I decided to do after hiking 12.3 miles this afternoon. A shelter lies just 2 miles up the AT, but I can reach the one at which I plan to stay tomorrow night just as easily from here. Hell, maybe I'm just wimping out again, but at least it's only a small wimp out. The notice on the bulletin board at the Mount Rogers Visitor Centre advised hikers not to use the water from the adjacent stream here, which is just basic common sense in farming country. It said that Mr. Bruce, the landowner next to the shelter, provides water to hikers. Putting on my clean pants and shirt, I walked over with my water bottles. In front of the house, I met a lean man with a pleasant face who looked to be in his 50s. I asked him if this was the place where hikers could get water. He replied that it sure was, brought me around the side of the house to a faucet and told me to fill up. He said he has been meaning to put up a sign in front of his house for hikers. I felt a little self-conscious about imposing upon him, but he was a kindly, easy-going man who soon put me at ease. I talked with him for a long while. Among other things, he informed me that he was the landowner who had sold the corridor down Big Walker Mountain to the United States Forest Service. He said he had told them of a dependable spring near the ridge crest, but they had managed not to run the trail anywhere near it. Some hiker friends of his are going to blaze a side trail to the spring when he shows them its location. His wife came out of the house and he talked with her quietly for a moment. She went back inside and came out with a huge slab of fruitcake, which they gave to me. It was delicious and allowed me to conserve my munchy food for later on. The people I've met in southern Virginia have touched my heart. I've never encountered so many good people in such a short time. They make a lonely wanderer's burden a whole lot lighter. I think that a large part of my strange metamorphosis into somewhat of a nice guy is due to a need I feel to make myself worthy of the kindness they have shown me. I thank them for that too. Tuesday, the 14th of June 1983, mile 555.7. I woke up several times last night to the strains of rockabilly music on the car stereo of some local kids who apparently used the parking area for the picnic shelter as a party spot. The first time I was awoken was around 11 o'clock. The music kept me awake for about a half hour until a good song, which I actually wanted to hear, came on. Then they drove off, tyres squealing, down the road. This happened over and over again all night until I finally just slept through their visits. I read in the shelter register last night countless entries by hikers thanking the Bruces for all kinds of goodies. I left my own thank you just before I hit the trail at 6:30, bleary-eyed and fatigued. The path was rough and ungraded for most of the distance to Jenkins Shelter, but I was not about to allow myself to wimp out 2 days in a row and get back into those old habits, so I walked on all through the day in order to hike those 22 miles. Knot Mole Branch Shelter was 2 miles down the trail from the picnic shelter. 4 guys were having breakfast when I stopped there to browse the register. One was a thru-hiker from Montreal named Peter. 2 of the others were also thru-hikers, a couple of preppies from Massachusetts named Tim and Maynard. The other guy was the brother of one of the preppies. He was just visiting. I talked to them for a couple of minutes before heading out. It was another steamy day. After 7 miles of trudging up and down short, steep climbs, I had a long, steep climb up to and along Chestnut Ridge to Chestnut Knob. Both were nice. A long swathe of grassy flowering meadow ran along the ridge crest, up to and past the knob. It made a nice change of pace from all the wooded summits over which I had been hiking lately. A small, spring-fed pond in the heart of the meadow was veiled by swirls of intense haze. The whole world was green and white. Chestnut Knob had an excellent view through the steam into a large, scenic, bowl-shaped valley known as Burke's Garden. It also had an old stone shepherd's hut which had been provided with a new roof and a picnic table and renovated as a shelter for the Appalachian Trail hikers. I had lunch there. The next few miles of trail were terrible. The AT followed the crest of Garden Mountain, constantly climbing and descending along heavily wooded rock cliffs. The guidebook mentioned that there were few views in the summer from those cliffs. Try none. The section was a total waste of time and effort. At 7 o'clock, I was still more than 3 miles from Jenkins Shelter, having covered less than 19 miles in 12.5 hours of hiking. I started hearing thunder in the distance, so I ran much of the rest of the way. I arrived at the shelter at 7:40, managing to beat the bulk of the rain. My boots are about shot. Today I finally managed to pull out of the inside of the left one a narrow metal plate which had been working its way up out of the sole and jabbing into the ball of my foot with every step I took over the past 2 weeks. My foot felt like heaven when I put my shoe back on. Both shoes are separating from the soles along the edges in several places. Stick a fork in them. They're done. I'm now only 53 miles from Perrysburg. I would like to arrive Friday afternoon before the post office closes at 5 o'clock. I almost have to. I do not know if they're open on Saturdays, and I know they are closed on Sundays. If I do not hike well these next 3 days, it could cost me a long layover waiting for the post office to open just when I'm beginning to get on track. I passed the 1/4 point of the Appalachian Trail today.